tech company based out in Peckham, in the Peckham levels, if any of you have been there. We do some really cool shit, and we build cool shit. That's all I'm going to say. I've forgotten the spiel by now, but that's enough. We're hiring, but it's down the down low. Don't tell anyone. So the questions that you should have are, who am I, and what the fuck is ESNext? And so I'm Elliot. I'm a full stack, but mainly front-end engineer at HX, a React enthusiast, synthwave enthusiast, and I'm a competitive shooter. And also, I have way too many ducks. And also, I made sure that we got branded ducks. So if you ask a question later, you might get a branded duck. And if you ask a question really well, it might come really quickly, so duck. I will be, Rich is going to come up here and hold the mic at some point, and he'll be throwing the ducks, because he's not an engineer, and therefore can throw things. So what the hell is ESNext? It's a very broad term, and people use it to mean very broad and different things. Basically, it's just stuff that isn't technically released yet, but people are talking about or might be released soon. So it might be coming up in ES 2020, or might just be sort of on the proposal pipeline in JavaScript. And what do we mean by ESNext in this talk? Well, two things we're going to talk about. Knowledge coalescing and optional chaining, both of which are in stage 3 proposals. But we are going to talk about today, because this is a React meetup, ReactConf, whoop, and these have both just been added to create React apps. So everybody can just use these, and they're nicely transpiled for you. And also, as John tells me, so everybody tell him off if he's wrong, they've just come out in Chrome 80 natively supported. So you don't even have to put under an experimental JavaScript flag. So that's cool. There's also a bunch of other stuff that we could talk about, but we're not going to talk about, and I don't really know a lot about. So again, ask John. He's the one in the blue hat over there, if you want to know about that. And we're going to talk about destructuring, which isn't ESNext and has been out for ages, but I like it, so that's happening. So, right, knowledge coalescing. It's a very complex word. It really sounds like something that some windy CS professor is writing a 400-page theoretical paper on, but actually it's really simple. And it stems from a problem in JavaScript that I see as a problem, which is that we have both undefined and null to talk about stuff that isn't really there. So you might, and other languages don't really do this. You kind of just have one concept for sort of a none or a null, or you haven't set this variable yet. And the problem in JavaScript is that we use both of them, and we shouldn't. You kind of should pick one. And we then make this problem for ourselves, and we get around it by just deciding that everything is truthy and falsy, and we just convert stuff to Booleans really easily, which is great. It's a lovely thing about JavaScript. Everybody loves this, but it can get us into some binds. So for those of you who might be pretty fresh in the audience, we're just going to go over truthy, falsy stuff. If you're more advanced and you're going to start falling asleep, I promise you it gets really interesting soon. So everything in JavaScript can be treated like a Boolean. There's a nice table here about what's sort of falsy and truthy. And that conversion can be done explicitly. You can call a Boolean constructor and throw your variable in, and it'll turn it into a Boolean. Or you can do what the cool kids do and do a double not on it, which is technically faster from performance means, but who's really profiling? We build really bad web apps these days. And then implicitly, you can also do it. If you use a conditional operator, it's just going to magically turn it into a Boolean anyway, even if you pass in an array or a string or something. And then you can do it really frickin' awkwardly with double ampersands and double ors. And you go, oh, well, that's fine. I'm just having this thing and that thing, or this thing or that thing. But it doesn't always cast them to a Boolean. And that's where some of the problems come in. So sometimes we just use falsiness as a check, and it might be a bit overzealous. So specifically, double ampersand and double or are really nuanced. So if you like your definitions, which I do, if we say x and y, it means if x evaluates to being truthy, then give me y, otherwise give me x. So it never actually necessarily returns you a Boolean unless one of those things is Boolean. And x double or y is, if x is truthy, give me x, otherwise give me y. Which is kind of fine for a lot of cases, but sometimes can get us into trouble. So I've got two examples for this. So for a double ampersand, in React, we do this sort of stuff a lot. I know it's not maybe a great example, but hear me out. You might say, OK, well, I'm going to use the truthiness of list.length and say if there is a list.length, I want to print some text. If there isn't, then the list is empty. I don't really need to say how many things are in it. And that's fine. When we actually have stuff, it'll say there are 3 items. Great. And when we don't have stuff, it's going to print a number 0. Because list.length evaluates to 0, which is falsy, so it gives us list.length, which we don't want, because why would we want to print 0? In this case, this is actually really easily fixed by list.length triple equals 0, is greater than 0, and you're done. But other times, for a double OR, we have some really big problems. So say I've got a function that creates a title, right? Your functions are probably more complex than this. But I'm using this, and then other people in my organization can use this function, and they can pass in overrides to it to use not my title. And so that's fine, and somebody just calls it, they get my default title. And if they pass in, some override, they'll get that override. But if they don't want a title, they're not allowed to not want a title. They have to have my default title. And this actually becomes a problem in a lot of places where you deal with user interaction or by people using your stuff who you don't know, which is, for any dev working on a team of bigger than one, everyone. So how do we solve this? Well, really, what we care about in this case is that override isn't null or undefined. We want it to be set. And that's really the point of nullish coalescing. Ooh. And what does it do? It coalesces nullish things. So we basically decided that the question mark operator isn't used enough in JavaScript, and we want to use it more. And we're going to double question mark, and what that does, definitions again, if x is null or x is undefined, give us y, otherwise x. So we can just split out those cases where it's not used, and we can set a default on the right, but then we can carry on with the thing if it's used on the left. And so how that looks in this example, the exact same thing happens. We can have our default title, and we can pass in an override, and it works. But then if we pass in an empty string, it actually gives us the empty string that we want. Yay! So it's fun. Everybody should like this operator. It's out there now. It's very simple. So that's the first part, nullish coalescing. And then the second part is optional chaining. And that's my colleague's favorite thing, really, because it stops me from writing some kind of bad code. And I might need Richard to. All this is a Create React app that I whipped up today. So just to prove that this stuff is actually in Create React app already. And what it's, I'll hold this for a minute while I'm talking to you. You just look silly. Yeah, it's look silly. Yeah. And so what we're doing is we've just got a bit of state to have a timeout. And this timeout we're fetching from some backend service. And we just want to set, we're just maybe fetching some config variable to tell us how long a timeout is meant to be. And we're going to use a callback, and we've got a button to every time we fetch it, and we can get that timeout. Okay? And this is going to be of the form. If we hover here, we can just see, oh, someone's nicely documented this. It's of the form object with data in it and timeout with number in it. So great, so that just means that I can probably call result.data.timeout and have the thing. And then if I actually save it, great, I'm getting a timeout from the backend. That's great. But sometimes we have backend engineers, and I'm not looking at that table, but sometimes we have backend engineers that don't always send us stuff that we want, and it might be broken or in pieces, or we might have bugs in code. So we need to account for the fact that sometimes the results and the responses that we get back from our backend might be a bit wavy. And in this case, all I'm doing is that true is just, it's making the objects in the middle randomly appear and disappear. So if I fire this button now, great, that worked, that one worked. I haven't saved, no. Hey. We get an error. We get an error because cannot read property timeout of undefined because the middle objects have disappeared. So maybe I need to make sure that the result is actually there. Okay, so I'll say result question mark, and then maybe I'll have to think of a default now in case the backend has failed. So great, I'll do that. Okay, and so I can keep fetching. Awesome. Oh, it's fallen over again, he says. No, it hasn't. There we are. And now it still also falls over again. So result is definitely there, but oh, data might not be there. So then I have to extend out this check in advance to say, OK, and result.data. And for good measure, let's now also just make sure that the timeout is actually there if I'm going to pull it out and use it. Otherwise, I'll get undefined. And suddenly, I've got oh, and Prettier thinks it needs to be on 2 lines now, which is great. And so now I'm code reviewing that. And yeah, it works. And sometimes I get 60 when it fails. But it's not really nice, is it? And it looks a bit shit. And this is sort of the thing that we're left with, this really long line of endless chains, and it looks crap. And you're thinking, OK, well, that's not too bad. I see that in a code review. You just got to do that. The problem is that I am really lazy, and I hate long lines. So actually, my colleagues have to review me writing code like that. Because I just decide, well, I'll just do all the error catching in line, and the results do default it to an object, and then if that's not there, I'll default it to an object and I'll pull it out, or I'll do it with a 60. And I'm actually kind of lying a bit because I wouldn't really write code like that. I'd actually destructure it because I like to feel smart. And I mean, honestly, who wants to review that? So there must be a better way. There is a better way, called optional chaining. And again, we've decided that we can use the question mark operator for more stuff. So we just say, foo, if it's there, give me bar from inside of it. And what it's doing under the hood, kind of, is it's saying, right, do I have that thing? Is that thing an object? Cool, great, I can call bar on it. Otherwise, call bar on, well, it's not really doing that, but it's like calling bar on an empty object, and therefore that would be undefined. So if the thing isn't in there, you're going to get undefined, and if it is in there, you're going to get the property of it. But it's safe to do, and it does all your error catching for you, which is great. Everyone loves that. So what does it turn this into? Well, we can rewrite this whole line in about as much as it took us to do the very first bit by just throwing in a question mark here and a question mark there. And it all works. Happy days. So what it's doing is it's just saying, right, if the result is undefined, just give us undefined, and that's going to default to the 60. If data is undefined, do that. Same with timeout, right? Great. Does anybody spot a very slight problem with that solution? Yes, good man. The timeout can be 0. And sometimes we actually might want to respect what the backend sends us for some reason. So what should we do? Yeah, you're right, more fucking question marks. Nullish coalesce on it, and then if the timeout is 0, we use it, and if it's not and it's undefined, then great, you know, we'll use 60. We'll use that default. Does that make sense for everyone? Great. But actually, there's even more stuff that we can do. If I've got a function and I want to call it, but I don't know if I've actually got the function, I'll just put a question mark in and a dot, and it's kind of doing this. It's saying, right, do I have the thing, and is the thing a function? And if it is, call it like it's a function, otherwise give me undefined again as the result. And also we can do it for square bracket operators, which is the same sort of thing. It's looking for an object, and for the keen ones of you, you can see that's going to work on arrays, it's going to work on objects. Fun times, right? We can pull out properties. So it's a really, really cool operator. Right, this is whistle stop talk. We're into destructuring time. And this is completely unrelated, but just because, again, John showed me it, and I was like, that's cool, I have to tell other people. I think it might be sourced from Ryan Florence originally, so fine. But for those of you who don't know about destructuring, we'll do a quick recap. Destructuring is basically, and you saw it on the earlier slide, is pulling properties out of an object and doing everything on the left-hand side. And I really like, for some weird reason, and I don't know why, I like doing all my coding on the left-hand side of the equal sign, because it makes me feel smart. So if I say define an object, and it's got maybe foo and bar on it, and then I can get object.foo, and that's fine. And it gives me bar, right? But I could also, a little higher. I can also pull it out, which is really cool. And that's basic destructuring, right? So I start doing all of my calculations on the left-hand side. Right, and that gives me bar. And also what I could do is I could then say, well, that's actually going to be some string variable from somewhere, and I'm going to rename that, and I get bar out, and I can do that. And it starts getting pretty magical again. And look, it's still giving me bar. Great. And we can do the same sort of stuff with arrays, right? Like you've got the array destructuring, which you see whenever you do your use state calls or that sort of thing. So, right, we might have A, B, and we can spread some more. Great, we've got some array in there. Bar doesn't exist anymore. That'll work. There we are. Great. And so you can see what that's doing. It's pulling out that 0th element, that's that first element, and then it's spreading the rest into a new array, which we can use. Fun times. But, as we alluded to earlier, arrays are just objects. And we can also address objects with that square brackets notation, which means that theoretically, if I get back here and just assign this real quick. I should be able to do that. I should if I use the correct brackets. And I can. And that's kind of weird. But okay, because maybe we're now thinking of an array as an object where the keys are of type number and then the properties are just whatever is the properties. Right. The crux of this stemmed from how do we get the last element in an array? Okay, right, we'll do array, square brackets, array.length -1. Yeah, but how do we do it on the left-hand side? And that's where we go, okay, well, we've got our array destructure before, and what if we, we'll get there eventually. What if we just take that, spread in the rest, and then say put x on the end? And anybody who's done any sort of functional stuff before, oh yeah, rest element must be the last element, right? Anyone who's done any functional stuff before will go, well, I want to do that, right? It's just pattern matching, right? And you can't do it in JavaScript because the way it works is it goes left to right. So if I had A, B, rest on there, it would take out that A element, and it would take out B, and then it would go spread the rest into that array, and it doesn't know what's on the right of it, so it just spreads everything up to the end of the array, and then it can't pull out the thing at the end, and it decides, okay, right, we're not going to do that. And that's really interesting, because actually what it also means is that when I've pulled A out, that's in scope for B. So B could have a default set as A, all on the same line. So to prove that that works, I could even go A off of an array with a single element in it, and I should be able to. Result is 1, and B, the result is also 1, which is kind of weird. And then if we look at how the array can be treated like an object, we can then say, well, what else can I do on an array? Well, I can pull out its length, can't I? Yeah. Okay, well, if I can pull out its length, can I then immediately index with it? It turns out I can. Maybe I shouldn't be able to. And that's basically what I'm going to leave you on, because that's a bit funky, and I think it's super cool. And if anybody ever does it in a code review, fire them. So thank you very much. That's the end of my talk.